Even if I tried really hard, I couldn't find a better expert on seaweed. I'm here with Simon Ranger today. He's going to lay it all out around all the benefits of seaweeds and why we should be running out and gorging on seaweed every single day and having it in our diet. If you're already convinced, the links to the products are below. Otherwise, enjoy the podcast. So Simon, what would you call it? Seaweed, sea vegetables, or sea greens? How would you frame it?
Ever since we started 27 years ago, I've insisted that people call it seaweed. The reason is that when you call it sea vegetables, the tendency is then to sort of lump it with all the other vegetables, and it's like just another vegetable. And it's not. In fact, there's an argument to say that it's more like an animal because it reproduces with sperm and eggs. It doesn't grow like a vegetable. It certainly doesn't grow in the ground, but it's not really like a vegetable. And it's more parasitic in its kind of the way it's structured and what it does, behaves. It started long before there were any vegetables and before there were any animals as well, really. It's the sort of primordial food stuff of the ocean. And that's what everything lived on in the sea, in the ocean. It's long before there were fish. So it's a very, very ancient food. And it's quite different from a vegetable, which we can talk more about.
Yeah, so it's not a vegetable, but it's not quite an animal. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's seaweed.
Yes, so it's a completely unique species.
It's not an ocean version of a land vegetable.
Okay.
It's actually almost the exact opposite of a vegetable.
So seaweed is basically something that's been growing since time began, or since...
Yeah, about 250, 300 million years, we know.
So, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's been growing, it grows on pretty much every single shoreline and all over the globe.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much indigenous to everybody.
Yeah.
Everyone's traditionally had it as part of their culture at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone can eat seaweed.
Yeah, and probably humans have been eating seaweed ever since the very beginning on the coasts.
Yep.
And in fact, there are many people who think that it's the marine diet with all its essential fatty acids and so on that it's really essential for us to develop the kind of brains that we have, and still today. And I think that's the sort of connecting thing between seaweed and our diet today. It's not the vegetables, it's the fact that the seaweed grew up in this environment, converting all the minerals into soluble form, all the things that were in the ocean, all the nutrients that are in the ocean are in the seaweed. That's where we all grew up. That's where we all came from. That is our chemistry. So it's still the chemistry. It still has the same chemistry as our bodies today. And the things that are missing in our land diet are exactly the things that we need to get from the ocean, and particularly from seaweed, because unlike the much later species that came in the ocean, like individual fish and shellfish and so on, which are sort of fractions of the seaweed, nutritionally speaking. The seaweed is a complete nutrition. It has all the nutrient groups. It's a complete food. And it's got all the things that completely complement what we can't get from our land foods, what we can't get in our land diet.
Yeah.
And we can't even get them in fish. So it's a really important component. But it should be, again, not something we eat large amounts of occasionally. And I've spent all the time with the Seagreens project, right from the beginning, trying to explain that seaweed is something that we need tiny amounts of, but we need it all the time. We need it every day in our food. Most of the things are the micronutrients, the minerals, the vitamins, the essential fatty acids, the amino acids, the things that form proteins. All the antioxidants are in the seaweeds. All the things that we get in our fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and so on. And these are the things that we need. They are micronutrients. They're the things that enable literally hundreds and thousands of daily processes that are in our body using these micronutrients all the time. And they're the things that we don't manufacture in our bodies. And many of these micronutrients are quite difficult to find. You need a very diverse and varied daily diet in order to get all these tiny things. And they're all in the seaweed. So it's tiny amounts every day. So this is a complete different way of looking at seaweed from looking at it as a vegetable, another component of our normal diet. It's the complement of it, it's the opposite to it, and it fills the gaps. If you only need tiny amounts, we're talking about, a quarter of a teaspoon of dried seaweed.
It's about a gram, yeah?
Yeah.
About a gram.
About a gram.
And that's a recommended amount per day.
4 grams is a whole teaspoon,
Yes, sure.
a teaspoonful.
Yeah.
And we only need that. We only really need a gram or two, up to half a teaspoon a day in our food. So how are we going to get that? It's really something that we need to put in there every day. And that, frankly, that is exactly what you find in the old traditional Japanese diet. They're really the kings of seaweed. They've been doing it very, very long time, and in Korea and places. And that tiny amount is just an ingredient. It's not a vegetable on a plate. It's not a slab of meat. It's not even a carrot. It's a tiny little thing.
A unique little thing.
Yeah, it's a
on
unique
your
little
plate.
thing.
But we're not getting enough of those kind of micronutrients in our diet, so are we?
No.
And a lot of people would really benefit from getting more seaweeds in their diet.
Yeah. And so, then you need to ask the other question, well, if I'm going to use that every day, and if all of us need it, that means our children need it, our infant babies need it, our mothers who are about to have children, they need it. And if you're going to do that, well, you don't want to just go out there and pick something off the shelf that you don't know about, especially if it's come from somewhere you know nothing about its origins and so on, and you really don't know what's in it. It's got to be something that and this is that's why we started the Seagreens project, because it really needed to be researched. We really need to understand everything about native seaweeds in Europe and what's in them exactly. What is the composition? Not just the good stuff, the nutrients, but what is all the potential contamination or whatever. If you're going to give this to people who are tiny little kids, or you're going to give it to your old people, you're going to give it to people with all kinds of allergies or digestion or whatever, kinds of compromised digestion, which is very, very common. Yeah. It's got to be very pure. You've got to know everything about it. You've got to know exactly what's in it. And so that's what started the project. And today we have that. We have the knowledge of our seaweeds. And this tiny amount, the other thing is that we discovered that, we've done a lot of research, as you also know, which we started about 2008, after about 10 years of producing our seaweeds. And what we discovered through that research was that, and this is a really interesting fact, that when you get to around 4 grams, which is about a teaspoon, it starts to become therapeutic. Some of the early studies we did were in obesity and diabetes and related conditions. And we found that, in obesity, for example, at around 4 to 5 grams a day, it starts to actually have an effect on digestion and therefore on metabolism and on the ability to actually lose weight that you put on.
You've got that study on your website, haven't you?
Yeah,
yes.
We have.
Yes.
Yeah, and there are plenty of published projects that we've done. But so you move from a point where 1 gram a day, 2 grams a day is really enough to give our bodies on a daily basis all the little bits that the body needs to function properly, with no gaps, to sort of 4 grams to 5 grams a day, a teaspoon or more, where you start to actually have, really quite dramatic therapeutic effects. Micronutrients are not things that we should have in large amounts. And in fact, if you have, large amounts of minerals or large amounts of other micronutrients, they can become toxic quite rapidly. So it's not something that then you would want to use on a long-term basis at very high amounts, but for a short time, they can be very therapeutic. And the interesting thing going back to Japan is that in the traditional Japanese diet, which is something I didn't discover until I went there in 2007, first time, that in the traditional Japanese diet, up till I think the records finished around the 1960s, but there was 4.6 grams a day in the traditional Japanese diet, which was, the traditional Japanese diet was created when Japan became Buddhist. And it's funny, they ended up with a traditional intake of around 4.6 grams a day, which is just verging into what we would say is a therapeutic amount of micronutrients to have in your body. In other words, they're not just to fill gaps and to be there when you need them. They can actually do things.
Yes.
And, that's another story, but that's where you get into the really fascinating stuff.
What would you say the key health benefits are seaweed will really help with? And just for the people that are watching, so they can really understand seaweed, why should they take seaweed on a daily basis? What can it be good for? Yeah, what are the key benefits?
Depends on the individual, but some people notice it very quickly within a week. Yeah. Other people, it may be gradual over a period. And I would say that the extreme of that is that many people write to us, still do. I mean, after 25 years, still saying the same thing. We notice it when we don't take it. We notice it when we stop. Yes. And what they're noticing is a diminution of their kind of general energy level. A lot of people find that as they go through the day, they have ups and downs. And some days they feel really kind of lethargic and da-da-da-da-da. And after a while, they go up and down. That, I would say that in most cases, people will find that doesn't happen. It's a continuous level of, I don't mean energy in the kind of sense you rush around doing things, but a kind of, it's like you're not there, you're just there instead. Just a little bit up, Yes. And you find this in terms of immunity too. For example, if you get a cold or you get a bug that's going around, your mates have still got it 2 weeks later, and you've got it for like 3 days, and it's gone. Yes. Boom,
it's
bang.
Amazing.
I mean, a kind of a resilience, almost,
supported,
a sense of I can do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So people come to you with the thyroid problems, for example. Some people are hyper and some people are hypo. So some people are a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
So give me an example of what you would say to people who've got thyroid problems. Because there might be people watching.
There's a lot of misunderstanding around this, and a lot of people know seaweed because they have heard that it's a source of iodine. Yeah, it's a source of iodine. It's a very good source. It's the best source of iodine in any natural food. The best source of iodine, full stop. Because there's iodine that's made of, artificial chemical iodine, which is made of potassium iodide, for example, which is what they substitute or they fortify foods with. They fortify milk with it, or they fortify salt with it, to get the iodine into people's diet on a population basis. Frightening stuff. Because actually sodium, potassium iodide, when you put it into the body, we've done the research, by the way, it's another one that's been published.
Yes, and it's all on your website.
It's all on the website.
So for people who maybe are kind of concerned about it, what would you say to them?
Yeah, they should be concerned about it. I was talking about the potassium iodide. Yes. When you put potassium iodide into the body, it's not a natural thing, so it goes shooting into the body, you get a massive peak. And then you get a very quick decline. So what you have is this is not what the body wants. The body wants something that's gradual, that it can gradually and in a prolonged way it can absorb in the way that it does foodstuffs. So when something goes into your digestion, it takes quite a long time to go through it, and the body is extracting the things that it needs over that time. So when you put the seaweed into the body, it extracts the iodine. It's not like an iodine supplement, as it were. It's the iodine in the food. It's a soluble mineral in the matrix of the seaweed. And what we know now is that when you put it into the body, like probably all the minerals is attached to protein ions inside the seaweed. So it gradually releases the iodine, and also it takes a while to go through the body because the seaweed is a natural prebiotic, which means that it's a food for the bacteria in your gut. Not only that, it's a food for the good bacteria.
Yep.
It's actually anti-gram-negative bacteria. So things like your candida and your ghastly E. coli and things like that actually are diminished when in the presence of seaweed. So you've got this very good bacterial food, and what that means is that the bacteria is digesting your seaweed in the gut. It's gradually releasing that, and what that gives you is an iodine coming into the body, not in a great rush, in a peak, but gradually over a period. So you see a completely different curve, and you'll see it gradually go up, and then it equally gradually goes down. So what it means is that over a period of days, if you're having your little tiny bit of seaweed every day, you're getting enough iodine out of that you've got a continual presence of iodine in the body. And that's quite different to what's happening with your artificial supplements, your fortified food with iodine in it.
And don't the microminerals in the seaweed help your body on the uptake of iodine in the seaweed?
Yeah.
They all kind of work together.
Well, it's another whole point. When you put individual nutrients into the body, they never act alone. They are in, same as we are in life, they are in relationship. And it's the relationship between the nutrients that's actually much more important than the amount. People can stuff you full of iron, for example. Iron is one of the most general and one of the most needed minerals in the body. And you can stuff people full of iron, but if they don't have the rest of the micronutrients to make it operate, it will just go straight out again. There's no facility in the body. It doesn't have any receptors, so it's purely dependent on how much goes in and how much goes out. In the case of iron, women often have this problem. They do an iron test and they have a low iron, so they go along to the doctor and it gives them a huge amount of iron. It doesn't make any difference. And you give them a tiny bit of seaweed, and because it's got all the minerals, it's got all the micronutrients, the iron is then effective. And we've seen that in many cases. It just immediately resolves that problem. And it's pretty much the same with iodine too, because iodine actually doesn't affect the thyroid directly, but it constitutes a part of its food. It enables the thyroid to function. That's what it does. It interacts with all the other micronutrients and feeds the thyroid what it needs. So
beautiful.
That's the thing.
The beauty of it. So tell me a bit more about Seagreens, because I know you use only the racks, the brown. Talk about the difference between the brown racks and all the different kinds of colours of seaweeds.
Again, I try and put that in a context for you. So when I first got into this in 1996, really, the question was, which seaweeds and why? Where are we going to start? There's 600 species around the UK, around the British Isles. Never mind the rest of the world. There's about 10,000 plus. And first of all, they've got to be accessible. They've got to be, practical. You've got to get hold of them. You've got to get hold of them at a reasonable price. They've got to be able to be produced easily, and they've got to be something that's going to, survive and uphold its integrity during processing and so on. And it's got to be economical to produce it. And there are very few species that fit all those categories. So it was really starting from scratch. And we were dealing with seaweed that we were using in horticulture and agriculture. And from there, we branched out. So the rack seaweeds, when you go to the shoreline, wherever it is, more or less, where you've got seaweeds, you've generally got a gradual incline. Seaweeds don't grow on cliffs. You've got to have a nice sort of incline, and you've got to have rock. They don't grow in the sand, they grow on the rocks, they attach themselves. And then you've got within that sort of intertidal, where the tide comes up and down, those are the seaweeds that are most suitable for human consumption. When you go beyond that, like a lot of things, you go into an area of extremes. But in the shallower waters with the seaweeds, you've got seaweeds that are absolutely ideal for human consumption. Not too much of anything, not too little of anything, not extreme. The good example is the iodine we talked about just now. In the intertidal seaweeds, you've generally got 1,000 micrograms in there, which is more than anybody needs on a daily basis.
And they're wild, aren't they, the seaweeds that you use?
Wild, yeah, we're harvesting in the wild. And
Yeah.
it's a good point. Let's come back to that, because there's all this cultivation.
Yeah.
So we came down to focus on the intertidal species for a start, and that gives us like half a dozen useful seaweeds. And out of those, most of them are called rack seaweeds around our coasts, the Northern European and North American coasts. Then the northern cold water seaweeds. And when we looked at these rack seaweeds, we find that the nutritional profile of those seaweeds is absolutely complete. They are probably the oldest. They're the brown seaweeds. The green seaweeds and the red seaweeds are much younger in evolution. They're more specialized. Yes. And when seaweeds started, they were in this wonderful, vast ocean, which is still 70% of the planet. They've got everything in them. They didn't have to specialize. In fact, their speciality was to stop the stuff. There's too much nutrition out there. So they devised mechanisms to keep out the bad stuff and convert the good stuff, which is what they did. We now harvest 5 species. We've extended that. We originally started with 3. The wild rack species, we've gone into dulse, which is a red seaweed, because it's delicious and it's got so many uses. And nutritionally, it doesn't add anything, but it's got some special things that are quite useful if you mix the seaweeds. And we took one more, a kelp seaweed called winged kelp, because again, it's pretty. It's got a lovely green color. It's nice. It again, nutritionally, it doesn't particularly add anything. Within those few species, those 5 species, you've got everything you need nutritionally. Anything else you do is merely for, because it looks nice or it maybe tastes nice or whatever. Yeah, that's it.
So if somebody's going to a shop, most people have heard of kelp. Most people have heard maybe of dulse and the Japanese seaweeds, perhaps.
Yeah.
But, as a beginner, somebody who's really only heard of kelp, what are they looking out for when they go into a shop and they're thinking, I want some seaweed, I want to maybe improve my gut health or lose some weight, and they only know kelp.
Yeah, you raised 2 things. I mean, you raised the cultivation issue earlier, which we should talk about, because it's the other thing about the kelp, the names of seaweeds. Kelp is a deep water seaweed species. They don't grow in the intertidal. Even the one that we take is the deepest water of the ones that we harvest. It's at the edge of the intertidal bit. It's where the sea is at the lowest. So beyond that, you get the kelps. The kelp family of seaweeds, huge. And in the Pacific Ocean, for example, they have these huge forests, which are hundreds of feet tall. They're like enormous trees. In the Pacific Ocean, there's these great kelp forests, and elsewhere in the world as well. But that's why the word kelp has become like a generic word for seaweed. Yeah,
it's very common, isn't it?
Don't call it kelp, it's seaweed.
Yeah.
And the kelp is actually specific. It's like the rack species, and it's the kelp species. They're different, very different. So kelp is a problem, and frankly, if they call it kelp, they either don't know much about seaweed, or they're actually giving you kelp, which is not a good thing. It's cheap. It's very cheap because there's so much of it. But it's not great for human consumption. You would never give that to a child. You would never eat it every day for life, which is what Seagreens is about, and so on. So, and then you've got your exotic species from Japan, and the only one that I would ever recommend is the species from Clear Spring, who we know very well and we love. Let's go back to the cultivation thing. 99% of seaweed in Japan these days, and in China and elsewhere, it's cultivated. It's but in Japan, they get it from organic cultivators who, they've been doing that for centuries. But the big difference between cultivation and wild species is the same as between a wild salmon and a cultivated salmon. Yeah. these things are grown commercially. They're grown to grow as quickly as possible to produce the biggest harvest and, bang. So, and in Japan, you have all sorts of problems that, come with the fish farming in Europe. Right. I mean, seaweed would never grow like that. We get on just staying with the oriental species. I mean, some of them are very similar to our wild racks or our dulse or whatever. And they've all got different tastes and looks and so on and so forth. And they're, there's some that are just as nutritious as wild racks. It's wonderful. They're very complete. But it's good that we have different species because then we don't exhaust the wild stock of one or two particular species. If you're going to use your seaweeds for nutritional and particularly therapeutic purposes, they have got to be species that are produced specifically for human nutrition and the nutrition of, tiny infants and very old people, people with allergies, people with gut dysfunction, all the things that you've got to consider. And so you have to go through a very, very special production process. Now, I can illustrate that by the fact that when we started the Seagreens project, that was the basis. So, and there's no other company in the world that does this, and not the Japanese, not anybody. And the reason is because they're not producing their seaweeds for the same purpose that we, I don't think anybody eats clear spring seaweeds every day, religiously for their nutrition's sake.
True.
They do it because they love it, and that's great. It's a food. That's how it should be. It's like any food. But if you're going to do what we're doing, which is for the basis of the foundation of human nutrition, you've got to know, as I say, everything. And then when we started the project, what we started to do was we started analyzing not only before we produce, but after we produce. We then kept that data, and we now have about a 17-year database of the total composition of our seaweed over 17 years. We know not only the average, if you ask me the average of any mineral, vitamin, antioxidant, whatever it is, I can tell you exactly what the average is over that period. I can also tell you the minimum that would be in that seaweed. I can tell you the maximum that will be in that seaweed. And so you have something that is as close to, God awful to say it, but as close to a pharmaceutical or, something that you know a lot about. Not exactly a white powder, but it's a dried powdered seaweed or a granulated seaweed. We know as much about that as we can within the natural variants of that seaweed. So you can never get it exact, but we do know those parameters. And that's terribly important because when a therapist is using our seaweed in nutritional therapy, they want to be sure of the outcomes. They want, they don't want to give them something and have no idea what the effect is going to be. Sure. And that's what I faced when we started the Seagreens project. I didn't know, so I started eating it myself, and I have done every day since. Yeah. But the point about that is that when you look at these other species and the other origins, yes, go and buy them, especially the clear springs, lovely stuff, and, use that in your food. But that's not the stuff to take at this tiny amount every day for the whole of your life. And that's what our project is about.
Absolutely.
Now we get to the cultivation.
Yes.
Okay, so what is cultivated seaweed? You produce your spores in a laboratory, and you then attach those spores to whatever substrate you're going to grow it on in the ocean. It's usually ropes, but they've also got all kinds of, special plastics that they're putting into the sea underneath, like floating things that are either suspended on lines or they're attached to whatever the structure is that they've got in place. And they will seed those things, and they will, generally speaking, for most of the species, they grow very rapidly, especially in the early months of the year. Not always, depends on the species. But then they are looking to harvest those within a few months. Those spores have only seen the natural environment for a very short time. It's like your salmon. There isn't that evolutionary urgency. There isn't that to survive, to I mean, what makes seaweed so amazing, it's been there for millions of years. It has survived everything, you know. It's on its surface, it's got a lot of the nutrients are actually on the surface. A lot of the microbial nutrients that produce the nutrients are on the surface. This is their protective layer, if you like. These are things that you can only build up and are only going to exist in a natural environment. Nature has, in every area, including us, it has a way of driving itself. Everything works together, and it works in a relationship. And when you undermine those relationships, there's always a cost. And I'm sorry, but cultivation is doing that. That's what it is. It's easier for man. It's easier for human beings. It's more commercially viable. I'll give you an example. When we've done our research, it's been one of the biggest and most difficult things for us was to convince our researchers. When we got our funding and we got our universities, or we went into it with one of our customers, they wanted to, the first thing they want to do is they want to take the seaweed apart and dissect it and take out all those nutrients. They think, well, those, they call them active compounds.
That's right.
The active, we want to know what's doing that. What's the thing that's doing that? And we say, no, it's the whole thing that's doing that.
That's right.
It's not a part of it.
Yes, they did
but
it.
The
did
inclination of science is to pull everything apart, find out what it is that they think is actually having that effect, and then miss all the other bits. They're not interested in all that.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the whole of things.
Of course it is.
So when you look at the whole of a cultivated seaweed, it's the same as the whole of a cultivated salmon. It's not as good. You know, it might keep you alive, but it's missing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's in itself is on the way to destruction. It is not on the way to life and evolution and development. If you want to fill your body with things that have already been denatured, whether that's, potassium iodide, which, okay, well, it'll do the trick, but for how long? What will be the end result generations from now? And the same with cultivated foods. If you want to start with something that's, like odd, is not how it's meant to be, what are you going to end up with? Yeah. You're going to end up with the degenerative line, the degenerative route. We're on the positive route of life, and we can bring all these seaweeds back into population use, bring all that nutrition and that balance of nutrition, more importantly, back from the ocean into our daily food stuff. And what we're doing, and this is why wild seaweed is so important, and it's really important. It's such a big subject you've opened up.
It is a huge subject.
But the important thing about it is there enough seaweed out there? Aren't you going to denude the denude the planet of seaweed? Well, the first fact is, the whole of the agricultural land, or the whole of the land available to us, is only 30% of the planet. Only 40% odd of that land is available to us for agriculture. There's 70% of the planet with seaweed in it. Not everywhere, but it's massive. Yes. And, let me give an example. In Scotland, on the Outer Hebrides, we're out in the boats, we're harvesting the seaweed. We're in a loch, one loch that is about 7 miles long on the east coast of Lewis, the island. And we're harvesting, very slowly. We're collecting 300 millimeters of the top of the seaweeds. Why do we take the top of the seaweeds? Because we don't want all the allergenic stuff that grows on the seaweed down the bottom. So it's all part of our methodology that we've developed over the years. So we're harvesting this amount of seaweed very gradually by cutting it on the surface, and it floats. So we collect it. And those plants continue. Not only do they continue, but they grow better, because it's like when you clip your roses or whatever you've got, and they grow like that. They put out more and more bits. When you cut them off, they put out more bits. So they're growing that 300 millimeters up to the surface again very rapidly. Within 1, 2, depending on the species, within a few years, we'll harvest that again. we're going along this lock. It's 7 miles long. Within the half of the day, when we're pretty knackered, we break for lunch. And most of our harvesting is in the center of the lock because we don't want the stuff too close to the shore. Again, because we want to avoid the allergens. That would be around 15 tons of seaweed. Yeah. So we go the rest of the afternoon, and we got about, during that day, we recorded about 35,000 kilos, 35 tons of seaweed. Put that into perspective for our consumers. We stock every year. We have a warehouse here, and we stock around 35,000 kilos, about 50,000 now, 50,000 kilos of seaweed, which will last us for almost a year. And we generally harvest several times a year, by the way. So that 50,000 kilos of seaweed is about the extent of our business today. We're selling our seaweed in 16 countries. We are getting into around 4 to 6 million mouths every day. We are in about 100 different food products. We also have our own range of, different products for consumers to use at home and in therapeutic, the clinics and so on. And so I think you can begin to see that in this tiny lock, this is one lock. I mean, there are thousands of locks in Scotland alone, around the island of Orkney. There are dozens of islands, all with, seaweed. Up in Norway, where we also harvest, there is a 1,000-mile coastline with, endless islands and locks. I mean, thousands of islands, and we've harvested in Norway for 10 years when we first started. And now we're harvesting in Iceland too. And there's a bay which is like, it's Breiðafjörður, and it's 25 miles across. Yeah. With thousands of islands. I mean, we haven't even touched the surface. And then there's the whole of North America, and there's plenty of other places now. God, if we could get rid of Putin, we'd have Russia as well. Huge amounts of seaweed. I mean, it just, don't even think about it. We've recently set up a company in New Zealand. By the way, that's the exact opposite of the British Isles on the other side of the planet. It literally exactly. If you drill through, you come out just off the coast of New Zealand. And it's about the same size, they've got the same amount of seaweed. So we haven't even started there yet. So rest assured, consumers, you do not need to cultivate seaweed. That is only for the convenience of the money bags and the lazy people.
It's just an economic decision, isn't it?
It's hard work. It's hard work, and it's often dangerous, and it's but it's immensely invigorating and beautiful. I've been out in up in the north of Norway and Lapland, in May when it's still ice on the sea, and it's, by God, it's a wonderful experience. It's going to keep you alive. I'm 75. It's going to keep me alive for many, many years to come.
Yeah, so rest assured, it's good for your health and it's sustainable.
Yeah.
So it's
sustainable.
And there's plenty of it.
I hate that word, but
yeah. It is a cliche. So before we wrap up,
totally sustainable.
I would love to convey the heavy metal chelating elements of the seaweed. I know that a lot of people would be really interested in that because it's very good for detoxes and for anti-pollution. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, and again, it's so important what you're saying. And there's so much misunderstanding about it. First of all, it's not radioactive. We monitor for radioactivity over 25 years. But in fact, I would say an organic farm is not as clean as the places that we take our seaweed out of the ocean, So it's about relationship that we talked about earlier, the relationship between nutrients. If you have heavy metals in seaweeds, you have heavy metals in every food that you eat. But the important thing is that when you've got the total matrix of the seaweed within that compound, within that whole food, you've not only got heavy metals, a little tiny bit, you've also got 40% of the seaweed is polysaccharides. In seaweed, you've got 9, 10, 11 different kinds of polysaccharides. These are compounds that bind heavy metals and they take them out of the body through the gut. The other thing, iodine is another good example. Iodine is a halide along with fluorine and chlorine and bromine and so on. And you've got all those halides are in the seaweed, unique. You don't find those all together in normal foods. And we need them. but we need them in balance desperately, because if there was too much of one kind of halide, they all compete with each other. We wouldn't get any iodine. But we know from our research that we're getting 33% of the iodine in the seaweed actually gets absorbed into the body. What's happening to the rest of the iodine? Well, it's competing. It's got competition from the other halides, so they're also competing for receptors in the body, but the body is able to take up more iodine. Why? Because there's far more iodine than the other halides. Yeah. All these things are in a beautiful, natural, chemical formula, if you like, a chemical structure which is the same thing, it's the same structure that our bodies had all that time ago when they first started. I mean, we started agriculture 6,000 years ago. We've been on the planet for what? I don't know. Nobody really knows. But, 1 million years ago, it's nothing. It's like we're very late in the day. Yeah. And I think it's quite new. I don't think people generally get that. It's certainly not about seaweed. Mm. But this relationship, which is, on the one hand, you've got this sort of context, this relationship, geographical relationship between the land foods and the sea foods and, what's going on at the moment. But you see this temporal relationship goes back through time. Whatever we do, I mean, however many iPhones and the technologies we discover and how much cultivation we do, we've still got this same body, to do it in. And that needs the stuff that's always been around on this planet, and in particular ratios, in particular relationship. Yes. And when we deny that relationship, we're on the road to, then we really do ourselves harm.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think that's a perfect ending, actually. That philosophy. Thanks,
Great.
Simon.
Great.
Brilliant.
Oh, and I remember, by the way, our early discussions. When we first met, I was in London, when I was going around the Fresh and Wild stores and the Planet Organics and the new stores that were coming on, the health food stores, the natural food stores. And we were really at the beginning of trying to get this message across, what is seaweed and why should you use it? Yeah. And you were working in the Fresh and Wild store and you were advising customers. They made you a food advisor. And we started to talk and you got excited about it and you went off on your own bat and you went to talk to Camden Council and they gave you some schools to go and talk to the kids and go talk to the parents and educate them about what the kids should eat. And then you went to the Ham and High in 2005.
That's right, I got in the paper for it.
And she was on it was only like the fourth page a big picture of Charlotte and it said the headline was something like, food advisor getting seaweed into school dinners, school food. Yeah.
That was the ideal anyway. And, that was the
dream. we have been consistent over the years. I mean, you're still doing this. We're still trying to get the population, not as some sort of middle class, organic, special foodie kind of thing. No, this is for the people who can't afford the proper diet or think they can't afford a proper diet. They can. It's for everybody, this thing. And it's, for kids, at all ages, all health conditions.
Absolutely.
And we're still doing that.
Absolutely.
27 years later.
Yeah, beautiful.
I'm going to be around a lot longer. You're going to be around a lot longer. It's really exciting. And we're going all over the world. Yes. And it's really exciting to think where this will be going in the next half century or whatever.
It is very exciting. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about myths around seaweed. One of the first myths is that people will come to me and sometimes say, oh, I shouldn't really be eating seaweed. My doctor's told me I've got a thyroid problem and I should stay away completely from seaweed. What would you say about that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, we know from our research that there's no seaweed is toxic, for one thing, and that it cannot affect the thyroid in the sense of, stopping it working or interfering with its activity. I personally, as in my family, there is a thyroid problem, and my father had an underactive thyroid. I have an underactive thyroid. I take 100 milligrams a day of thyroxine. I have had to for the last 10 years. About 10 years. And I take my Seagreens every day. What we've found through the research is that most people with an underactive thyroid will be able to reduce their dose by probably around 25%, that there is absolutely no question that it can do any harm, and that it's a food for the whole of your body. It's not just for your thyroid.
Right.
So that,
Yes.
it's for like 90% of it is good for you in other ways, not just the thyroid. But it can't upset your thyroid. The toxic label that a lot of doctors understand it to have is because there have in the past been problems, because people will, people have been eating the wrong kind of seaweed, or they've been eating excessive amounts of seaweed in some countries, or, whatever. It's like if you have, salt is good for you, but if you have too much of it, you're going to have cardiovascular disease or whatever, So it's a question of a lack of knowledge, and unfortunately the doctors who say that, they certainly don't understand seaweed, but they certainly don't understand Seagreens, and they haven't read the research that we've done. So it's just a myth, it's another myth.
Any other myths that we could discuss? What's the other myth about seaweed? That it might be polluted, perhaps?
Well, there is another very important, that it's polluted. No, there's less pollution under the sea than there is above it, that's for sure. The air is much more polluted than the water.
Sure.
But the myth that I think is quite prevalent, and I've heard this even among nutritional therapists and so on, is that they think that, I should either take seaweed every day for all the micronutrients, or I should take, a multivitamin and mineral supplement, or I should, if I'm having a particular regime of supplements, I don't need any seaweed. Well, that is a huge myth, because all of the practitioners that we work with and the doctors in America, they understand that the seaweed is actually the micronutrient foundation for almost any supplemental therapy, almost anything. And if you put it up against, as I just put this in the book as well that I'm writing, if you put it up against if you put it up against a really good quality, comprehensive, organic multi-nutrient supplement, you will still find a very, very limited range of nutrients that have been selected for that formulation, because it is a formulation, it's not a whole food. It's got lots of whole foods in it. It'll have, extracts or parts of all kinds of fruits and vegetables and all sorts of other things in there to get all the nutrients. It's fine. But first of all, it's usually formulated to do a specific job, and it's not a whole food. It doesn't have those relationships between those nutrients. So you put the seaweed in there, which provides that supplement with a much better chance of being effective in the body, and you can use the Seagreens as a foundation to that supplementation. And if there isn't enough of after you've used the seaweed, if you've still got certain nutrients that are missing, or certain groups of nutrients that are too low, you can always supplement on top of that. But to supplement and not have that foundation is actually quite dangerous, and it doesn't really help the patient, because as soon as they stop taking that supplement, they're back to square one again. Sure. It's like trying to lose weight, do all these weight loss programs. Yeah. When you stop, it's nothing. If you take this every day, you'll lose the weight and you're still going. And it's the same with the supplements. So that's another very important myth, I think. What you were just saying, yes, Dan, about this whole issue of nutritional supplements, many of which are of a much higher order and a much more complete thing. But it's the same with drugs and with pharmaceuticals and this whole new generation of weight loss drugs that have been promoted like hell. That all of those things are working in the realm on addressing the realm of symptom. They're addressing the realm of problem solving. They are short term. They are not entering into the realm of causation, the root of the problem. And when you when you do that, you have to approach it differently. You can't introduce these kind of maybe very effective, but effective for the short term, effective that the person will take those things, and then when they finish that, what do they do then? They're back to square one. It's never really solving a problem. Here, what you've got is something that, comes up from the deep, and it goes into your body, and it's putting those things right, but in a gradual way from the realm of cause. It's preventing the degenerative diseases, yes. and at a higher dose, as we said earlier, when we were talking, at a higher dose in the obesity world, for example, at sort of maybe up to 4 times the daily amount that we would say for normal foundation.
So, Simon, fantastic chat. Thank you so much. I've learned so much about seaweed, and I hope that our viewer has too. Do you want to talk through what it is you've got to offer in terms of your products, and also where people can find you to buy it?
Yeah, I put these here because the 3 basic ways. There are 8 or 9 products, but they're really for different forms for people to use in different ways. But the basic thing is you either take Seagreens in capsules. I take 2 every morning. Have done for 27 years. And you can take more when you're feeling, a little bit under the weather, or you get a bug 5 times that much. So this is a dried granule. This is a real culinary ingredient. You can put it into anything, from a broccoli soup to a bowl of spaghetti,
Which I do.
I do too. Yeah. I mean, lovely stuff. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you can get really, really fancy, and you can put some of this stuff, which is like little pieces of special kind of seaweed. Lovely. Put those onto pasta or whatever. And then mineral salt. We've got these condiments where it's partly salt, and you cut out at least half the salt, and you put all the minerals from the seaweed back in again. Much better. So there are little things like that. And if you go to Seagreens.shop, which is now since COVID, this is our new place where you can go and buy everything. The nutritional profile of every product is on there in great detail. There's a lot of other good, useful information. And then if you go to our main information website, which we're about to upgrade and refashion, but it's seagreens.co.uk. There are sections on there under healthcare, which is called university. But there's all about our healthcare stuff. And in there, you can find articles on loads and loads of stuff, and all published research articles, things that you can find. So
fantastic. And people can get hold of these books, these lovely information books.
We did that during COVID.
Yeah. All about the Seagreens story.
It was up to 2020.
Yeah.
The development of what we call nutritious food seaweed standard. Yep. It's a standard of seaweed production, which is now, it's an international standard. And that, we developed that with the Biodynamic Association. This is like the story of developing seaweed for human nutrition. And it's something for everyone. That's the book. And this one is about the 27 years in seaweed nutrition. Again, it's about the little bit of, introduction to how to use the products every day, which products there are, and so on. It's a more detailed information.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon.
Okay.
It's really, it's been an educational experience.
Lovely to see you again. We shall do this again in sometime in the future.
Really great.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Simon. Thank you so much.
We're on television.
We are. Okay.
Great.
Yeah. If you're already convinced, the links to the products are in the... Okay, if you're already convinced, the links to the products are below. Otherwise, enjoy the podcast.